Welcome back, everyone. Lovely to see you. I hope you enjoyed lunch. Curry was good. The vibe in the vaults was brilliant. And listen, let's jump into the afternoon session. And what a fantastic...
Sorry, I missed the curry.
You missed the curry?
I missed the curry.
What did you have?
My favourite food is curry cooked by white men. Honestly. Generally, I love it. Jamie Oliver's curry. Carry on, sorry.
This is the place for you. Someone save some curry for Sathnam for later on. Listen, fantastic to welcome to the house, Sathnam Sanghera. You know his work, I'm sure you do. He's one of the most perceptive, sharpest, subtlest, and funniest observers of this place, not RSA, the UK, Britain, and its place in the world, and what it's done to the world. He is now memoirist, journalist, novelist, and historian through his various books. And one of those books, Empireland, known, I imagine, to many, if not everyone in the room. Book of the Year, National Book Awards 2021, and now followed up by his brilliant companion work, Empireworld. I imagine we'll get onto both of those today, Sathnam, one time or another. The first tracing the impact of empire on British identity, the latest book doing the same thing on the global stage and demonstrating all of those skills that I mentioned at the very outset. Sathnam, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
To the RSA. Fantastic to have you here.
I learnt an important lesson, which is that the RSA is not the Royal Academy today.
It's not.
So I went there. But you were connected at one point.
So we were the origin of the Royal Academy. So back in the 1760s, one of the first things we did is host the first ever young person's art exhibition in this room, from which a splinter group went off and created the Royal Academy.
And the Royal Academy, I think, at the moment has singly the most interesting exhibition I've ever seen on colonialism and slavery. I recommend it if you guys haven't seen it. It's incredible. It's the kind of exhibition that lots of us wanted, and we were told there's not enough material, no one's going to come, and actually it's a blockbuster. It's got rave reviews, 5 stars, even I think in The Spectator. And so this history is not just really important, it's also really interesting. I think it's the most interesting conversation in the world at the moment.
Yeah.
Colonialism.
Well, we're going to have that conversation, I hope.
I keep stopping you, I'm sorry.
Not at all. It's going to be, this is the conversation in the room, by the way, so we're going to go to the room very early on for thoughts and questions for Sathnam. I want to kick us off, though, just to warm us up. I think this is a quote from you. Empireland is about putting Britain on the therapist's couch. Now, I put it to you, Sathnam. Was that your aim when you kicked off? Was that the therapist?
Well, it's active therapy for me, but I think therapy is a good analogy because I often get accused of being divisive. Why talk about all this dark stuff? You know, isn't it divisive? Shouldn't we just move on? Don't you hate Britain that you want to talk about slavery and genocide? And it's like, I'm in therapy. It doesn't mean I hate my mother. You know, it's actually, it can be an act of love that you've gone into therapy. You want a better relationship with your family. And yeah, I think it's a very apt way to look at it. I think as a country, we haven't gone through a process of truth and reconciliation with the fact that we were behind the biggest empire in human history. It kind of ended, and we never really thought about it again. And it's created all sorts of problems.
Yeah. And the act of writing these 2 fantastic books, what's it done for you? Tell me how it affected you personally, your thoughts, your perceptions on the country that you call home.
Yeah, I guess, again, it's not something that people often ask me, you know, didn't it make you hate Britain? It has the opposite effect, because actually it makes me locate myself in Britain more profoundly. I now know that we are a multicultural country because we had a multicultural empire. Yeah. I now know that brown people and black people were hugely involved in World War I and World War II, something I was never taught at school, you know. I now know that the money from India and from slavery helped build this country. And that places me in a more profound way. And then, of course, I'm a Sikh. And, you know, the Sikh identity, which was largely created and shaped by the British, the idea that we're a martial race, as you can see, looking at me. It's obviously true. But that idea, and also Sikh demographics, so many people converted to Sikhism because the British fetishized us in the late 19th century. The British Empire even explains our numbers. So for me, this history is absolutely intrinsic to me. I can't separate it from my own life story. Or even the story of the Royal Society.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean,
yeah.
There's a plaque downstairs which shows how various times the Royal Society gave awards for people making innovations in slavery, but other times made awards for reducing the burden on the enslaved. So that's a deeply complicated history, right?
It is. I think any institution our age inevitably has to confront that.
Yeah.
There's no avoiding it. We're steeped in that. But when you're talking about these issues, though, and you do so, I should say, you know, in a beautiful and subtle way, in a non-confrontational way, which I think is really important. You talk about this is not a question of totting up the assets and liabilities. That sort of national balance sheet approach is the wrong way to think about this.
Yeah, well, it's a good question coming from you, an economist.
Thank you.
But yeah, I mean, it's an absurd way to look at the history, just because how do you balance miles of railway against millions of lives lost in a famine? It's an absurd equation. But then, I mean, what I've realized in Empireworld is that not only the legacy is complex, but they're contradictory. You know, you've got empire, you know, resulted in quite a lot of democracy in various parts of the world through complicated kind of processes. It also resulted in massive geopolitical chaos in Burma, Nigeria, Kashmir, Pakistan, Palestine. Empire resulted in massive environmental destruction around the world. It also led to the birth of modern environmentalism. Empire was involved in slavery, massively. 3 million Africans transported across the Atlantic. Equally, it was involved in anti-slavery and went around the world, abolishing it. So two things can be true at the same time. This is something social media and British politics cannot handle, you know. And actually, I think people can't handle it, but it is something that books can explain. And I really do think that the idea that opposite things can be true at the same time is a secret to coping with a whole bunch of really difficult things in the world. A lot of conflicts, Israel-Palestine, but also conflicts in our lives. Yeah. You know, I think the secret to understanding people is that whatever you say about you, the opposite is true to a certain degree.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a massive introvert, but actually I don't mind doing this occasionally. You know, it's a contradiction.
I'm a massive introvert too.
Are you?
Yeah.
The flowery shirt suggests otherwise.
Yeah, well, you know. That's my defensive shield, Sam. I mean, what you say echoes is very interesting. What you say of societies or nations. We had David Olusoga here 2-3 months ago. He was asked, I remember this very well, he was questioned just over here, and it was Churchill a hero or a villain? And David said, well, like every other human that's ever lived, he's both.
Absolutely. Churchill, he probably gave a better answer than I'm going to give, but Churchill saved liberal democracy. Also, he was a massive racist, even by the standards of his time. His colleagues were frequently outraged by the things he said. Both things can be true at the same time.
You mentioned, but you're right, it's almost impossible these days to hold both of those things at the same time in your...
Especially when the government are, you know, when Boris Johnson, in the middle of a global pandemic, is saying, when he should be looking after human beings, is saying, I'm going to protect this statue of Winston Churchill with my last breath, as people are literally taking their last breaths because of his failures. Right. You know, to him, a statue and this... It's also, he doesn't believe it himself. You know, if you read his book on Winston Churchill, it acknowledges...
You've read that?
I have actually, unfortunately, read that book. But
there's a confession.
He's pretty frank about, you know, his racist colonial attitudes. But then, when you're a politician, you're selling a more simple message. It's very depressing.
So how do we get, I mean, is this an educational thing? How do we get people to reach this subtle balance point in their judgment on bifurcated, divisive issues of which we are falling over ourselves with them at the moment?
Yeah, I would say it's education. It's true, the only answer is education and to read books. But the problem, I feel like we're drifting in the other direction in that social media increasingly sets the tone for everything. It sets the tone for our politics now. So politics is somehow getting even worse. So I don't know what the answer is. And a conflict like Israel-Palestine seems to have broken our politics and our social media. And I just wish people would read books more, but it doesn't seem like that's happening.
I wanted to, because one of the aspects of your book that I hadn't thought about at all, or perhaps just didn't know anything about, was the extent to which the impact of empire on the environment. And the social dimension is known to a greater extent, but the environmental dimension actually was quite a revelation to me. Can you say a bit more about that, Sathnam?
Yeah, it blew my mind too, and because I don't really see plants as an extension of colonialism, because I see them as interior design, like most people. But actually, plants were at the cutting edge of the colonial mission. So cinchona gave us quinine, which enabled us to survive malaria, which enabled us to colonize large parts of Africa and Asia. Tea, we made tea, the British made tea into a national drink, not only in Britain, but in India, because they could make huge amounts of money of it. We went to war with China, the Opium Wars, one of the most misunderstood episodes in British colonialism. We lost the American colonies, partly. Tea was involved with that. It created modern marketing. So the legacies are huge with tea. And then you've got rubber, which again, I didn't realize was a plant. And rubber became hugely profitable, so much so that we launched a war against malaria, the so-called 1948 Malayan emergency, called the Malayan emergency and not a war for insurance reasons. Because if it was called a war, the companies involved wouldn't have got compensation.
Wow.
But also one of the darkest episodes, mass murder, torture, sexual abuse, very, very poorly understood in Britain. And actually, I've got one of the legacies in my pocket, because you told me to.
Bring a prop,
Bring
a prop.
Bring a prop. This is a plant legacy. Do you know what this is? Does anybody know what this is? I'll be amazed. It's a golf ball. It's a 19th century golf ball. What is it made of? Gutta percha, which there's a... I think someone
Who said that, by the way?
Someone over there.
Wow.
Gutta percha was the first plastic, really, and it was a natural plant. I think someone got a Royal Society medal. There's a sign downstairs.
Yeah, there is.
Called the innovation. And what this enabled the British to do is to cover wires with waterproof material and thereby lay the telegraph system, which enabled communication between London and the colonies. Mm-hmm. Even today, the wires that motor the internet follow the same routes. So this plant explains the map of the modern internet. But then we harvested this natural material to such a degree that it became almost extinct. Massive environmental destruction. But then, in reaction to that, British imperialists realized they were creating destruction and started coming up with environmental ideas and ways to conserve the environment, national parks, and so on.
Fantastic story. Round of applause for that story, actually.
I got it off eBay, £20. It's quite hard to get gutta percha, but some of you might have it in your teeth, because it's still used as a filling material by some dentists.
Is it really? Mm. Can I ask you about people now exploring their mouths, as you're saying that?
Get the bits of that white man's curry out of your teeth.
The Commonwealth Games. The final chapter of Empireworld talks about your experience at the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham. Obviously very moving for you. Actually reading it's quite moving. Can you say a bit more about that as an experience for you?
Yeah, I went to the Commonwealth Games not expecting much, because the Commonwealth really has struggled to have a point since its beginning. I mean, what is it? You could say it's a collection of former British imperial states, but it's not, because actually I think Rwanda and Togo are recent members. They were never part of the British Empire. You could say it's countries where they all share the same monarch. That's not true. Yeah. Only a small number of the Commonwealth countries have King Charles as a monarch. Yeah. I mean, when Nehru allowed India to become a member, he sold it to his cabinet on the grounds that it didn't mean anything, so we might as well join. I think someone described the Commonwealth Games as an off-Broadway Olympics. So I wasn't expecting much, but I found myself quite moved because the Commonwealth Games last time happened in Birmingham, and you had all these Commonwealth athletes coming to Birmingham, a hugely multicultural city. So multicultural, it gets beaten up regularly for being multicultural. All this talk about Birmingham being full of no-go areas because of Muslims and brown people, black people and so on. You know, it gets beaten up for its multiculturalism, but that night, it totally made sense to have a Commonwealth Games in one of the most multicultural countries in the country. And actually, it was quite a beautiful experience. I felt quite moved by it. Also, my book was part of the ceremonies, so that made me shed a tear or two. But I do think the Commonwealth could serve a positive function because you've got an organisation struggling for a meaning, chaired by a monarchy struggling to deal with colonial controversies, and you've got members who want to talk about colonial legacies. Why not put it all together and turn the Commonwealth into a kind of truth and reconciliation body for these issues? And I'm not the only person who suggested it. I think Demos suggested it about 20 years ago. It was laughed away by the Daily Mail, though. So the problem is, I actually think the royal family would be up for it because they are significantly more woke than our politicians. They have to be, because they have to listen to the Commonwealth. Yeah. And also they have to represent the multicultural nation. Yeah. The problem is we've got a government which are really keen on culture wars when it comes to the empire, so I can't see it happening anytime soon.
On that question of culture wars, I mean, I know that you yourself have, through the books, have been, well, subject to all manner of abuse, racist and otherwise, by dint of that. Can you say a bit about, not about that, but how you've coped with that? This is courage is a theme of the of the day, and you must have shown enormous courage in producing a second book, not least.
Yeah, I can't say I didn't throw myself into it with a sense of fun, given, I stopped doing adult events because people screaming at me, and, threats, having to report people to the police, stalking, and all this kind of stuff. It made the whole process heavy. But I'm not the person who's suffered the most, because, David Osogo, he probably didn't talk about it because he doesn't want to talk about it because it provokes people even more. But, he's known to have a bodyguard at certain events. Corinne Fowler, who was a historian who wrote the National Trust report on colonialism, regularly had to call the police, became too scared to walk down the street, is monstered and libeled in the press regularly, even now. So I think I've suffered less than them. But it's not acceptable. Historians are basically putting forward knowledge. You shouldn't be trolled and feel threatened because of that. And I feel like people aren't cross enough about it. Yeah. And often the people encouraging the trolling nowadays are the politicians or the newspapers who are also complaining about cancel culture. And it's like, what are you trying to do to us? You're basically trying to cancel us because we're trying to put forward a certain, new research or new knowledge. But and personally, sometimes it's horrible, but sometimes it's funny. It just depends on the day. Sometimes someone will send me a threatening letter and I'll post it on Twitter because it's amusing. Right. And it depends what else is going on in your life, and sometimes it's fine.
And I'm going to go to the audience in a second. Last question from me, though, Sathnam. Does that help explain? So one of the striking features of your follow-up book, Empireworld, is just how thick the bibliography is and the notes, right? You've been meticulous in backing up all of your stories with evidence and facts, so that this isn't the world according to you.
Well, that's because I get attacked a lot, and people say, you're not an historian, you're making stuff up. There's a sense that all imperialist ones are making stuff up. If it changes, because even Rishi Sunak has gone on the record, I think he said recently, people should stop trying to rewrite history. And it's like, that's literally what historians do. It's like, you've not understood. Even our understanding of the Romans is changing all the time because we discover things in archaeology. Our understanding of the Stone Age is changing all the time. Our understanding of the empire is changing really quickly, largely because the British repressed a lot of the information at the time. Right. There were so many documents being burnt when we left India that there was said to be a pall of smoke over Delhi, if you look into the origins of Nigeria, the men who founded Nigeria burnt all the documents because they knew history would not judge them well. The Mau Mau case, where we were forced into court, a lot of the documents have been concealed. Even now, the records of Lord Mountbatten, the final viceroy of India, are still officially secret. No one knows why. And yet he was involved in partition where up to 2 million people died. It's probably in the interests of the world to understand what he was thinking. And yet it's still officially secret. So I think there's been a concerted effort by the British state to conceal what happened. It's no surprise that 60 or 70 years later, a lot of this stuff is emerging. And it's no surprise that some people feel triggered because it challenges their version of events. Because what they were told and taught at school was wrong, at the very least.
Let's go to the room and collect some questions. And wait for the roving mic, but who'd like to ping the first question, Sathnam? Should we start over here and then over here?
Thank you very much. I'm really conscious that although we're having this conversation in the UK now more about empire, my mother's going to be 96, and when she grew up, when she was 11, the war broke out, and she had the map of the world at school, which showed 40% coloured pink, that was the British Empire. And my daughter, who's sitting next to me, when she was 6 at school, that was the same map, and it just says, we used to have an empire. Not great progress, but anyway, that's the anecdote. But the question is, I know nothing about what has Spain done about learning from its empire. What has Holland done about learning? I feel that I'm in a conversation here in the UK about what we need to do, but I feel very ignorant, and I wondered if you could help me.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and someone should write that book. But I absolutely do not think we are the country with the biggest problem with imperial nostalgia. The country with the biggest problem with imperial nostalgia is Russia. You know, it's nostalgia, it's inspired it to launch war. But that's what can happen if you have a distorted sense of your own greatness, right? There was a survey done of the former European colonial powers, and actually we weren't the most nostalgic nation. Can you guess which European nation was more nostalgic about their empire than us?
France.
No? No? The Dutch. The Dutch, and it makes sense. I mean, even smaller than us, they were way ahead of the British. I mean, the British were trying to catch up with the Dutch East India Company. Yep. So it would explain why they have these feelings. But equally, if you look at what they're doing, you know, I think the Dutch royal family have apologized. The parliament there has commissioned research. The Belgian parliament has commissioned a special committee to look into this. There's talk of apologies. The EU is talking about reparations. When it comes to doing stuff about it, we are way behind, I think, the international conversation. But obviously, nowhere near as bad as some. But I think we need to talk about it, in particular in this country, just because of the size of our empire, because it was the biggest ever. And also something about us being an island makes us disconnected from what we did. I think most other European nations have had a darker night of the soul when it comes to World War II. They've had to face up to their history. Interesting. Whereas we've never really had to do it because, oh, it happened over there, let's pretend it never happened.
Fantastic. Over here.
Hi Sathnam, my name's Lella. I just started my degree in politics and international relations, and one of the options I got to take for my modules was global history. And as someone who just completed my A-level in politics, which was focused on the Tudors and the French Revolution, this module really struck me as interesting and really left me wondering why in a space of an hour my lecturer was not only able to tell us everything that I knew about the French Revolution, but then teach us about things like the Haitian Revolution, which was arguably even more revolutionary and historically significant. So my question to you is, given it probably isn't in political interest to reform education, to share the whole truth and to talk about global history, what do you think we can do to make sure more young people are aware of our past?
That's a very good question. I feel that young people, in the absence of education, are doing it anyway. I sense a massive desire amongst young people to engage with history, mainly through the story of empire. And they're going to school and saying, Miss, sir, can you tell me about slavery? Can you tell me about the Raj? And empire is on the national curriculum, Key Stage 3, but it's a tiny proportion, as you know. it doesn't reflect the fact that British Empire is the biggest thing we ever did as a country. It doesn't reflect the fact that British Empire was the biggest thing, one of the biggest things that ever happened to the world. And it's especially absurd given, I think the world sees us through that prism, and we don't see ourselves. We see ourselves through the prism of, I don't know, was it World War II, Mr. Bean, you know, Oasis. But they don't, because they remember what happened when we last turned up. But I do sense, this is a good thing about social media, in that young children, well, students, young people in general, are learning stuff through the internet themselves, and then are reading books or listening to podcasts, and in the absence of an official education, are getting it through other means. I feel like I probably haven't answered your question, but thank you. Good luck with your degree.
And then we'll go to Ian.
Hiya, thank you so much for that. It was so interesting. My question is related to like what solid recommendations do you have for institutions? Because the thing I think is happening is for young people, for people from the global majority who are hyper aware of the legacy of empire, you feel like you need to just not engage with the older institutions who the minute you do a Wikipedia search, you're like, oh my goodness, what has happened? And I don't think that's necessarily the answer to progress, which is like creating a modern silo apart from the institutional silo. So what recommendations do you have to institutions on how they can... Sorry, I have one of the millions of bugs traveling around London. What recommendations do you have to institutions like the RSA so that they can make plain in their actions that this is a welcoming space to young people and to the many categories of people who would look into the history and see bright spots like awards for people who were campaigning for the abolition of slavery, but also the awards for the slavers?
It's a really good question. There's no simple answer to that, obviously. And you look at the institutions who have dark histories and what they're doing, and there's a huge number of responses. The Church of England, on Monday, is publishing its reparations report. It's dedicated £100 million to, as a form of reparations to descendants of people involved in enslavement. But more important than money is the engagement they're doing, the fact they're talking about it. And sometimes giving money can be culture washing, slavery washing, colonial washing, a way to shut down the conversation. I think if you're going to start giving money and start talking about reparations, you've got to be prepared for very, very difficult conversations and sit there and listen. And some institutions are doing it. I mean, just in my experience, Bristol University is doing it. They sit there and they listen. The Church of England are doing it. Individual families are doing it, like the Renton family, the Gladstones, the Trevelyan's. But also, I feel that as a country, whenever people mention reparations or this conversation, we clutch our pearls and go, oh my God, we can't pay. Was it £18 trillion we owe reparations according to the UN? And people go, oh, that's impossible. It is impossible, but I also think we've begun as a country, we just haven't realised it. For example, I would say our relationship with Ireland has been completely transformed in recent decades through a process of post-colonial truth and reconciliation. I see the Good Friday Agreement as a process of reparations. There's been money paid out. There have been official apologies. You have same in Kenya. It's happened. We were forced there by a court. But we paid £20 million in reparations, and the Foreign Secretary issued an apology. And the king, when he went to Kenya, had a much more sane trip on one of these royal tours than he did when his son went to the Caribbean a few years ago. So I think we have the capacity, and we're doing it, but it's just very reluctantly. And there's also a huge disparate nature in how different organisations are approaching it. But I do think we have it within us. And again, I've not answered your question, but that's because it's a big question.
Question from my colleague Erin, who's stranded in Nottingham with the train strikes. Given that schools are largely filled with history teachers who mainly came from a white Eurocentric history curriculum, how do we educate history teachers to deliver more of a representational history?
That's a good question. I personally, in my experience, don't find that necessarily people's race affects the way they want to teach this. I definitely feel that lots of young history teachers want to teach this history because they care. I feel like it's a generational thing. I think young people in general feel the same way about museums as I felt going to Dudley Zoo as a 5-year-old. I remember going there and thinking, Mum, why is there a tiger on this windswept hillside in Dudley? Shouldn't he be in Africa? And I feel the same. Young people go to a museum, they don't want to go, or when they do go, they're looking for the loot. They want to talk about colonial history. But yeah, it is problematic that so many historians tend to be white. It's a very whitened kind of sphere, and it's very Western-centric. But I do feel like lots of work is being done to see history from other points of view. And most history teachers are also historians. Most of them have done history degrees. And I think they're affected by this radical change in the way, this change in perspectives when it comes to history.
Thank you. Here.
Hello, hi. Talking about museums. I was brought up in post-war England, and it was a very
post-war?
grim time. Post-war UK,
okay, right.
In London. Very grim time. But, you know, as kids we had a lot of freedom, and I was brought up in Kensington and sent off to look at the museums. And my favourite museum was the Imperial Institute, which was a Victorian building in what is now Imperial College. It was the best museum. I learnt so much in that museum about the Commonwealth and commodities. Transmogrified into the Commonwealth Institute and eventually moved to a lovely new building in Kensington High Street. And there was an awful lot of education going on there. I helped, even though I was a kid, I helped them with their children's quizzes, get them right for kids. There was a massive interest, but something happened. It kind of died. The whole museum, I think the Commonwealth Society decided not to carry on supporting it. And I think it was a missed opportunity, because that would have been a vehicle to actually encourage further education and learning about the empire. There was a lot in there about the empire, but obviously, probably you would agree that it was a bit sanitized at times. But I feel that that was a massive lost opportunity. And I agree with you, you know, museums actually can be fantastic. And, you know, we're not doing anything on that. We need more of that.
Yeah, I agree with one thing what you said, but I do think that in a weird way, empire was better taught 60, 70 years ago than it is today. You know, kids would be given the kind of things, the ingredients that were coming, and the resources that were coming from empire. They were talked about in a regular way, probably in a very one-sided way, but at least it was discussed. Now there's almost nothing. But I think a lot of that collection ended up at the V&A, which is probably the most imperial of all of our museums.
So, thank you. You've inspired me to buy both your Empire books whilst you've been talking.
Great.
What are you hopeful about, and what gives you cause for hope today?
You know what? I am actually really, really optimistic. It goes against my nature because I'm a very negative person. But I'm really optimistic because I never would have thought when I started writing Empireland that the V&A would give back the Ghanaian loot on a long-term loan. Even the British Museum is talking about giving stuff back. King Charles, you know, goes to Kenya and talks about what we did to the Mau Mau. You know, something's happened in the last 3 or 4 years. Even when Prince William and Kate had that disastrous visit to the Caribbean, where they stood on the back of Land Rovers and touched black children through a wire fence, you know. Even then, the right-wing monarchist press, even they were like, this is not right, you know. And something's in the air, something has changed, even in the time I've written these books. And I feel like it's unstoppable, because you can't stop knowledge. All of this is based on people learning stuff that they didn't know before. And you can embark on any number of culture wars you want. You can't stop people learning stuff. So I really do feel quite optimistic. I think this culture war that this government has been on is already over. I think the only person into it anymore is Jacob Rees-Mogg. Even he doesn't really care. You know, he's banging on about the National Trust on GB News. No one's listening. If you look at the surveys, most of the British public, 3/4 I think it's a good idea to teach kids about slavery and colonialism. 44% of the British public think the royal family should pay reparations for slavery, which is amazing because I don't think even people have even understood that the royal family were involved in slavery until last year. So I see fast and meaningful change happening, and I think it's going to be a very different picture in 10 years.
Fantastic, yeah.
Hi, my name's Laxman. I'm a trustee of South Asian Heritage Month. Sathnam, you said something's in the air, and I think quite literally in this room. And I wanted to tie into some of the questions that have been posed by others in the audience. Today, I've learned so much about just, again, nature and plants and empire. And there's so much more that has been discussed. And given that this is about courage on the wider perspective for the whole day, I'm just thinking, tying into questions that have come up earlier about what is the RSA doing about its history and its demographics and its fellows and what it should be doing more, is do you think, and also one for you, Andy, should the RSA start a new strand, literally about empire, and that affects around so many different topics, and start to lead the way and become more of an innovator rather than sort of skirting around it somewhat, because I would want this talk to grow into something much, much more.
Well, I'll let you deal with a difficult question. Yeah, thank you for the work you do in South Asian Heritage Month. It's a great innovation, that, and it's taught a lot of people about the history. Yeah, obviously this stuff needs to be talked about in a more meaningful way. I mean, I walked past some of the plaques there. There's something about breadfruit, and it tells you about how the Royal Society, I think, gave a medal to William Bligh. And it's interesting, but it doesn't explain the whole context. So the story of breadfruit is fascinating. Basically, I forget the name of the person who did it. I think it's Joseph Banks. That's right, thank you, historian in that side of the room. Joseph Banks had this idea when he was on the way to Australia on Captain Cook's boat, that you could use breadfruit, he discovered it in Tahiti, to feed the enslaved. That it would be a cheap way of feeding all these people being exploited. So he made it his mission to transplant breadfruit from Tahiti to, places it could be used by the enslaved. But the interesting thing, what happened then, is that the enslaved didn't like it. And actually, they resisted it. So now, breadfruit is actually a very commonly eaten fruit, or food in Jamaica. But the evidence is that we have this idea that the enslaved, just did whatever was done to them. But actually, there's quite a lot of evidence they resisted it. I think the breadfruit is an important symbol of that. I would like to see that story up here, or next to that bit where you say you gave him a medal. Stuff like that.
Yeah, we're going to explore that. I mean, as some of you will know, many of you will know, we have an in-house historian, Anton Howes. We have a 300-page book on the RSA.
Is that the person who just shouted out, corrected me?
And we've also asked Anton to look at our own history through this particular lens. Could we and should we do more? Almost certainly yes, is the answer to your question. And could fellows be part of us answering that question? I'm sure they absolutely could. So one for us to pick up.
Yeah, and I think the Royal Academy have really given you an example of what you can do. And it's not something that necessarily is going to cause you pain. It might cause you some pain, but it's not something that's going to be a miserable, joyless, unpopular thing to do. It could actually be really rewarding and interesting.
No, I agree. I mean, my previous gig at the Bank of England, they've just gone through something very similar, actually.
Yeah, because a lot of the trustees were heavily involved in slavery.
Yeah. And it's been hugely positive. So absolutely, that's true, not just of Royal Academy. Let's take some more questions. So this gentleman's had his hand up for quite a little while, so I'll definitely go to this side of the room, because I'm conscious I've missed out the...
Are flowery shirts, compulsory? With so many of them.
Read the memo.
I missed the memo.
Paisley design from India.
Paisley design from India.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Made in Turkey.
Oh, wow.
I'm Titus Alexander, and I wrote a book on unraveling global apartheid. And I wanted to ask you about the links and legacy and lessons of empire in global governance. Because if you look at the structure of global governance, it is in effect a form of minority rule, except that rather than race as the discriminating factor, it's passports based on national identity, if you like. And if you look at the parallels between what happened in South Africa before the emergence of apartheid, or out of which apartheid was entrenched, it's quite similar to what's happening now, where you've got round the world barriers and walls being built up. You've got a strengthening of the resistance of, the majority world, if you like. So I wondered whether in your work you reflected on the legacy and lessons that we can draw from empire in terms of our current structures of global governance, which in many respects are actually more vicious than apartheid was in South Africa.
Yeah, it comes up a lot because Arguably, international law began with abolition. Arguably, international labour law began with British indentured labour. The United Nations arguably was based partly on the League of Nations, which was inspired by the British Empire. So the legacies are absolutely everywhere. And then you've got the rule of colonial difference. You know, in the 19th century, when the Geneva Convention was being written up, you had this idea, which the British insisted on, that, you know, colonial people didn't feel pain in the same way, that you could use vicious bullets on them, dum-dum bullets on them because they were savages and they could be treated differently. Isn't that idea present everywhere in the world today? You know, you can brutalize people because they're not like us. You can see that in all sorts of disputes. So I can see the legacy of the British Empire all around the place when it comes to global governance.
I will take a question over here and then come back to the left wing.
I'm embarrassed to say I don't have a flowery shirt, or I haven't yet read your book, but I intend to this month. Given that pretty much every historical figure judged from our current viewpoint is potentially racist, certainly exploitative, all of the traits we associate with, the negative traits we associate with colonialism. How do you untangle that relativism, sort of not to judge from
using modern
viewpoint, our current sensitivities, but judge them against the context of the time?
Absolutely, and well, I'll go back to what I said earlier. Opposite things can be true at the same time. Winston Churchill being an example. Gandhi, obviously a man who fought colonialism, heroic. We even have a statue of him near next to Winston Churchill, but had massively anti-black racist attitudes, you know, as a result of his experience in South Africa. So that idea that opposite things can be true at the same time can help us liberate that. But also you need to remember is that actually almost everything that happened in British Empire, every bad thing that every person did, was often opposed at the time by British people, by really important British people. Gladstone railed against the excesses of empire. Winston Churchill himself described Jallianwala Bagh as monstrous. Warren Hastings, one of the founders of the Raj, found himself dragged in front of Parliament, as did Lord Clive, to answer for his crimes. So everything at the time was being challenged. That's why we had abolition. That was a challenge to imperial policy. So often it's not applying modern morals to the past. Often you're just reminding people that it was objected to at the time.
Question over here.
Indeed, that was going to be my very question, which was, the context of the time. So I'd just like to thank you again for a wonderful chat, and particularly for reminding us all, and we have to practice it all the time, of opposite things can be true both at the same time.
Toy, look at Rishi Sunak. Total bell end. But, okay, sometimes I think. But, obviously, it's amazing we have a brown Prime Minister, but he actually stands in the way, I would say, of, racial justice being achieved. So opposite things can be true at the same time. Yeah. Who knew that the Royal Academy audience was so liberal?
Thank you.
Maybe this is more of a personal question to you, but I was just curious, between your two books, how would you describe them in terms of different chapters in your life when you wrote Empireland or Empireworld? I haven't read the books, but now I want to, so I'm curious. It might provide some context.
I guess my first book, Empireland, was an act of incredible naivety. I was near the bottom of my class in history. I'd not read many history books. I found them boring, dense, confusing. They didn't explain things. So it was a total act of naivety. I was teaching myself and teaching readers at the same time. The thing is, you can't do that twice. I think my editors of this book wanted me to do that, but I was like, I actually know some stuff now. So I can't pretend that I don't. And I'm just hoping that the audience come along with me. So the second book is more knowledgeable, but also, I guess, my understanding of the contradictions has become deeper, and also my feeling that this really is history that can unite us. And I also think it's totally key to us, carrying ourselves better in the world. And with Brexit, we're trying to redefine our relationships with the planet. We need to remember what we did the last time we went around the world. Otherwise, we look ridiculous. So it feels even more urgent than ever, partly because of Brexit. Thank you for your question. Thank you for all the questions. They've been very intelligent.
Well, listen, we should wrap things up. I've got this huge countdown clock.
Yeah, scary, isn't it?
To stop me overrunning, and now it's in the red. So we should draw things to a close. But listen, many of you have already said you're going to go out, rush out and buy Sathnam's books. And you're in luck, because they're on sale just outside. And if you're even luckier, Sathnam might even sign some of them for you, I think.
I will, yes.
So for those interested, that's the place to head. It just remains for me, though, it's been an absolutely fascinating discussion with lessons for us at the RSA to take away.
I look forward to your exhibition.
Well, it was that old. Could be an exhibition.
I can see the headlines of Telegraph. Royal Society of Art goes woke.
Yeah.
Picture of you on the front.
An exhibition's one way of doing it. Actually, when David Olusoga was here, I wasn't brave enough to ask him. But actually, what I would love to happen is for him to do a film. He does these Our House Through Time things. Do RSA House Through Time, drawing on our archives.
That'd be fascinating.
Maybe you can invite him ask him on my behalf. But that, there's other ways of reaching into your history and telling the story, and we should think imaginatively about that. Listen, wonderful session, fantastic discussion, homework for us all to do, including buying and reading Sathnam's book. But for now, please join me in thanking Sathnam Sanghera.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks. Sounds great. Thank you.
Because
Can I just start whenever?
actually, the point about
Hello, everyone.
taxes that I've learned with TTR is they will hardly ever. It takes years.
Hello, afternoon, everyone.
Exactly. Get that mechanism.
Move back.
Exactly. Oh, thank God.
Hello.
The big numbers.
Yep, ready? Okay, brilliant. Lovely to see you all this afternoon. Welcome to the afternoon session of the Fellows Festival. My name's Hayley Sims. I'm Head of Policy and Participation at the RSA, and I'm absolutely thrilled to host this conversation with three incredible creative leaders this afternoon. So by now it will be abundantly clear our theme for today is courage, and this conversation is going to focus on courage and the arts. So to answer that question and think about what courage in the arts looks like, we have a few very special guests. So here with me, next to me, we have Lucy Kerbel, the founder and director of Tonic, an organisation for which over a decade has been supporting the arts and cultural sector to achieve greater equality, diversity and inclusion. We also have Amanda Parker, an Olivier Award-winning arts and cultural sector consultant and a columnist for the Stage publication. Her work advances ethical practices and systems change in creative organisations to build inclusion in arts and culture. And Kate Varah is executive director at the National Theatre, working alongside director Rufus Norris to deliver and advocate for the theatre's huge national and international impact on stages, in cinemas, classrooms, community spaces, and online. So please welcome our panel. All right, thank you. So Lucy, I'm going to ask you to kick us off and set the scene for us with some of your thoughts about where courage is needed most right now to support the creative sector, not just to survive, but to thrive in the context of some pretty challenging headwinds.
Great, thank you. All right, hello everyone. So when I was asked to do, I got asked to do this sometime before Christmas by Vicky Kinkton, who's the director of communications and content here at the RSA. And my first instinct was to go, oh, that feels tough, because I feel like now is a time when courage is really required in the arts. I'm also aware that it's been an incredibly tough time for the arts. Obviously, we're not the only sector that's had a really difficult few years. But when she sort of asked me about this, I kind of felt slightly like there was a bit of a kind of a a crouch position that a number of people in the arts have sort of metaphorically adopted, of kind of, you know more. And I spend a lot of time working with people who are leading arts organisations and who, you know, doing extraordinary work and working incredibly hard in very, very difficult circumstances. So I guess that what I am starting off by saying is that it has been a really complex time. So I'm aware that plenty of you in here will work in the arts. For those of you that don't, I've just listed a few things just to give you a bit of context as to some of what's been going on in the last few years. So in terms of obviously COVID, which kind of hit every sector, every person, but I think for the arts, and particularly the live performing arts, there were particular complexities around reopening. Anything that involves big groups of people coming together for very obvious reasons was really difficult around COVID, and lots of openings and reopenings and then shutting down again. Obviously, there's been a very big financial legacy of all of that, and for some organisations, particularly the bigger ones, there's loans to be repaid, and that's only really beginning now. There was a lot of stuff that came up really during the pandemic around perhaps the imperfect relationship between freelancers and organisations, which hasn't really been rectified and is really, really knotty, but that has created quite a lot of unhappiness. And then, of course, just as organisations were getting the green light to reopen, of course, costs shot through the roof, and that was everything from building sets, you know, buying timber, through to restocking your bar or your cafe. Then, of course, connected to that, there was the cost of living and the impact that was having on everybody's workforces. And, of course, everyone's been impacted by the cost of living, but in a sector where, you know, salaries, fees tend to be lower anyway, there's a certain level of precarity, which was, you know, particularly difficult for people in relation to cost of living. Then, as well, we've found that the public are behaving differently in terms of ticket buying, or how they're spending their spare time, or how they're spending their disposable income. And then, of course, we've seen sort of ongoing funding cuts, and, you know, this hasn't all started recently. There's been ongoing funding cuts for many years now, but as I'm sure you'll all be aware, that sort of continues to roll on, and recently sort of the news of councils having to make, you know, 100% cuts to arts funding. So, and there are other things that I'm sure I have missed, which I'm sure Amanda and Kate could sling in as well. All of which goes to say I think it has been a time of feeling quite exhausted, and I think maybe a need sometimes just to sort of hunker down and kind of get through it. I think where courage comes in, however, is that we do need to remind ourselves of just how important the arts is. It is absolutely fundamental to our lives. You know, access to the arts gives people respite. It's that gig that you go to on a Friday night that just allows you to slot, you know, click into a different plane. It's the escapism of the novel that you read after you've done the dinner and loaded the dishwasher and you've got a couple of hours before bed. I think that the arts creates a sense of coming together. It's a place where people congregate in a world where far fewer of us have reasons now to congregate on a regular basis. And of course, participation in the arts, whether it's young people or adults, teaches creative thinking. And, you know, I think we all know we live in a world that is complex and where there are things coming down the tracks at us, or things that are already underway, that we are going to need generations who can think creatively, who can innovate, who can empathise, who can dream up new ways of doing things. There is no better place to learn how to do that than via arts education or arts participation. So I think that we do need to hold on to just how important the arts are to society. But at the same time, I think when you are feeling a bit exhausted, a bit under things, that is, of course, when you can sort of want to stay in your comfort zone, or sort of do what we know how to do, but maybe on a bit less budget, or maybe we might need to push those ticket prices up a bit there because people will still, some people can still pay that, so then that will just about hold over there. I kind of feel like we're now at a point where we do need to find ways collectively to be deeply creative thinkers about the future for the arts. And I know that might sound like an obvious thing. We work in the arts, of course we're creative thinkers. And I think, yes, we're creative in terms of the works of art we put out there for the public, but I think I'm talking more now about deeply creative in terms of how we do things, what our processes are, our systems, our structures. Our country has changed dramatically, even just in the last 4 years. It is going to continue to change dramatically. And doing things the way that we were previously, I don't think is going to quite wash for much longer. So of course it's not about throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's not saying let's get rid of everything, let's burn it all down and start again. However, I do think that now is the time where we need to support one another to pull our heads out of the exhaustion and the mire that we are very understandably feeling, and to be deeply, deeply innovative about how things could be in the future. And I'm happy to talk more as we go on about how we might do that.
Brilliant, thank you. Beautifully put, thank you. So I'll come next to Amanda. So yeah, I wonder if you could say a little bit more about sort of what we might do.
So should I start with an audio description? Because I don't know, you've been filmed. I'm Amanda, I use she, her pronouns. I'm a black woman with blonde hair in need of a retouch of my roots. And I am wearing a pink top with a black overcoat and a pink tartan skirt. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. So how do we find courage when so much feels beyond our control? When so much with regard to wealth, our health, our engagement with others, our freedom of expression feels dangerous or hopeless. And once found, how do we use that courage to ensure that we build back better and inclusively to honour those pledges that we made in lockdown and beyond to build a sector that is actually inclusive and diverse? To hold fast to equity, as so many of us fear our own extinction within the sector. In a series of articles I've written recently for The Stage, but also elsewhere, I detail where the gains have been made in diversity in theatre and where the sticking points are. And very largely, the gains have been made on stage in representation. And the picture, of course, is less bleak off stage, and particularly in leadership, business, finance, funding, the power roles. Systemic inequality still exists. There's a gap of some £25,000 between the average grant to organisations new to the Arts Council portfolio and those, whether they're diverse-led or not. So non-diverse-led organisations are effectively £25,000 better off from the starting point when you're new to the Arts Council portfolio, a £25,000 diversity gap, if you like. So that systemic inequality still exists. So when we come to courage, when we come to thinking about courage, courage means doing the things despite the difficulty, to attempt to achieve an end despite the penalties, the risks, the costs or difficulties that are of sufficient gravity to deter others from doing it. But for some people, there's no choice but courage. Is it courageous to jump from a sinking ship and try and swim to the shore if you're not a confident swimmer? Actually, it's a survival piece. So for many creatives, and here I'm thinking people who come from marginalised backgrounds, courage is to remain in the sector while the odds are so stacked against you. But for many of them, courage is the only choice. Sometimes being pragmatic is courageous. And when it comes to the UK's cultural sector, especially the arts and cultural sector that's not commercial, that's not for profit, being courageous right now, to me, means being really clear-eyed about the likelihood that the sector is going to shrink. It is going to get smaller. The public purse is shrinking, our access to it is diminishing. The workforce, as Lucy's spoken to already, is physically and mentally running on empty, and there's huge technical disruption coming with AI, which literally means jobs will be different and fewer in some areas. So clarity of thinking around what the sector will be, to me, is an act of courage. And we have a narrative in the sector that is, let's just ask the government for more money. We can all keep doing it, let's just ask them for more money. Courageousness, for me, is about that real clarity of going, ain't no more money, this sector is going to get smaller. What's essential is ensuring that in that shrinkage we don't lose the difference and we don't lose diversity as we go, that we don't become a homogenous blob serving the middle not very well, using tools and algorithms that might increasingly generalize our digital engagement to the point of homogeneity. Being clear-eyed about our courage means acknowledging uncomfortable truths. And here's another one. We need to think about where financial power is held and engage with it. And yes, I do mean publicly funded organizations. That public purse has got mothballs at the bottom. Ain't no money there for us. It's really troubling to me how often those with the most means are able to offer a helping hand to those without when they choose to, but there's little legislative imperative for them to do so. From the tax breaks of wealthy individuals through to the UK-based multinationals shifting profits overseas, this is a feature of every point in our society. And what does this look like in culture? Well, in the cultural sector, despite film and TV and tech, to name a few, benefiting from creative production, there's very little financial reward that flows back to the non-profit sector as a result. As AI grows in its reach, its wealth is built forever and ever, amen, on the work of creatives. So I'm not just talking about creative industries supporting cultural subsidized work, I'm talking about how we make big corporations, big tech, big money look at arts and culture's connection, contribution to social cohesion, the well-being of their workforces, the design aesthetic of their trainers or other goods they produce and market. Culture is everywhere. We are not getting that remuneration. For us to survive with courage, we need to understand and work with those drivers, the motivations and interests of power holders. We need to be real about this. Power holders are not driven by moral obligation. Philanthropy is a tax break, and it's not really a moral response. So what are the motivations we can lean into? And here's one. Legislation trumps moral obligation. Necessity is the mother of invention, and courage requires that innovation in this time of necessity. Distasteful as it may seem to many in the subsidized sector, courage requires that we explore in collaboration with power holders those existing mechanisms for wealth redistribution, and also through collective endeavor, imagine and bring into being new ones specific to the sector's survival. And let's bake in diversity into that survival. Wouldn't it be amazing to have a collective cultural task force that articulates and identifies incentives for larger arts institutions, the ones that are going to survive, to ensure that diversity is maintained even as the cultural sector shrinks? An uplift in meeting senior leadership diversity measures, for example, a standstill for those who miss targets, not just a lip service that exists in the Arts Council's requirements, but actual enforcement. Courage means doing the thing even when it's difficult. Am I out of time? Have I got time?
No,
thank you.
Yeah.
It's difficult to see why a large institution should be rewarded for doing what we feel is the right thing. But if they're not, let's just see where culture and diversity goes, right? So I think it would be a necessary act of necessary courage to form a collective cross-sector advocacy to government that helps government itself acknowledge the inseparable link between publicly funded culture and commercially successful culture, film, TV, AI, more. Advocacy that supports the creation of a mechanism where commercially creative industries are financially rewarded to support the survival of grassroots. This is not a call for yet another tax relief. It's actually a call for a cultural innovation fund that is, through legislation, required of private sector companies who benefit from the labour of non-profit arts sector and whose work is enriched by it. What will it take to turn positive thinking into real-world change on the ground in industries, places and communities? It will mean a revised relationship with the private sector and an ask from government for its support of us to do this. It also means a shift in our emphasis, focusing not on the moral rightness of inclusion, but on making it an economic imperative for the sector. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. And some reflections from you, Kate. Give us some hope, maybe.
Some hope. That's a good mandate. As Amanda said, for those that need the explanation, my pronouns are she, her, and I'm a white woman wearing black with trainers that my children don't think are cool. So I'm at the National Theatre and been given an opportunity to talk to you from the perspective of someone who is running a national institution that focuses on not just artistic excellence on its stages, but also participatory work for young people across the country. And our work also is shared digitally throughout the world, both in cinemas and online and in schools. And in reflecting on the theme of courage, I really drew on the fact that courage is hardwired into the practice of being an artist. If I look at the teams who are currently hard at work getting the 3 productions that we're about to open on our stages at the moment, I look at our actors who every single day go out and show extreme courage and bravery stepping into that space and giving of themselves. I look at the creative team who let the idea that they've had grow into something that people will rate out of 5. Who works in an industry where they rate your success out of 5? I look at the audiences who are coming in to a space that often they don't feel natural in or welcome or might not have been in as a child, but they still step in and they're still feeling brave when they do that, particularly post-COVID. And they are, as Lucy said, coming back, and that's a wonderful thing to see. And I look at the young people that take part in our programmes who come to us with hope and with a sense of eagerness and anticipation for what this could do for their life, not just today, but tomorrow as well. So I think courage just sits really comfortably in our DNA, and that is a good thing, because as Lucy outlined, there are huge challenges and headwinds that have been facing our sector, not just during COVID, but actually in this glide path to recovery. I almost think that running one of our organisations during COVID wasn't actually as hard as it is now. Of course, it was an extraordinarily challenging time, but there was one big central thing that we all had to grapple with. Now, there are headwinds all over the place, and trying to figure out how to rebuild your audience, rebuild your workforce, rebuild your relationship with the freelance community, at the same time as thinking really hard about some of those internal challenges that we've got from a financial perspective, takes a bit of focus and definitely a lot of courage. And picking up on what Amanda talked about, I think the courage aspect comes in really keenly when you're trying to think differently, because all of us have to challenge our preconceptions. There was a way of doing things in our sector, and I speak specifically with the performing arts kind of hat in mind, but I think probably this is resonant across the creative industries. There was a way of practicing, there was a way of reaching our audiences, there was a way of telling the story of who we are that is completely different now and not appropriate for the kind of environment in which we're practicing. So some of the really practical things that I'd like to pick up on today and share with you all and seek your feedback on are around what resources do we need as a sector to really shift and change the way that we work, what relationships do we need to build, and what infrastructure do we need to have to make it a sustainable sector, not just to work in now, but also to work in the future. In terms of resources, I think there are pockets of excellent practice. We've got people that are coming together much more than they ever did in COVID, so pre-COVID, sorry. So I think we learned something then. It's really good to talk as a sector. We had tended to work in silos before that, and the linking of arms that we did in order to lobby and advocate for our survival during that period has actually taught us something. And there are groups that still come together on a weekly or monthly basis who started 3 years ago in the pandemic, who find real succour in being together to share best practice, to moan sometimes, to boost each other up, to give each other courage. So I'd love to see those groups formalising in some way. To Amanda's point, what is the collective performing arts alliance that we might have that draws together not just the trade bodies, but some of the organisations at different scales and different genres at different levels? What could that group do really successfully? We see what happens when we advocate as one voice. If you look at theatre tax relief that we've all, or the performing arts tax relief rather, that we've all been trying to extend with government, the success of that has actually been all of us together, really clearly, loudly saying with one voice, that is important, that is a cushion that we need to get us to financial sustainability. So I do think there's a formalisation of some of those informal groups that could be really additive to us as a sector. I also think that we are absolutely rubbish as a sector of telling our own story, which is extraordinary because we're a sector of storytellers. And if I think about the incredible success that sport has had over the last 10 years of managing to link almost instinctively sport with mental health in young people, there is no way that anyone has to really make the case in the way that we do when they're in the sport world for the fact that sport is integral to a young person's development in school and as an extracurricular or co-curricular activity. We need in 10 years' time for that synergistic link to be made for the arts. So what can we do now to really help us get the population out there to make the case for us? Because we're bought in, right? We've drunk the Kool-Aid. We think this is a good thing to do. But what we need is local MPs being badgered that there isn't a creative education plan in their area, that there is a pullback of provision in schools, that teachers aren't getting the training that they need. We need other people to be making the case for us. And in order to do that, I think we need to get better at telling our own story and using the data that we have as organisations to help inform people, because everybody is inspired by different things. There will be some people that feel really moved by a statistic. There will be some people that are moved by a case study. There will be some people that are moved by seeing something happen in action. So I think we need collectively to draw together those examples of best practice to figure out a way that we can consolidate our data such that when we're giving it out, it makes sense. Everyone collects it in a different way. How can we work with DCMS and other government economists potentially to get a centralised way of being able to record not just our engagement, but our impact, which is incredibly important. And maybe the last thing, just on infrastructure, what can we do to really convince people that bricks and mortars matter, that it isn't just about a sort of building versus freelancer or a audience or participatory programme somewhere other than the theatre versus the theatre itself. We need our buildings to be fit for purpose and strong in order to make the work that is then shared across the world. And a lot of the organisations across this country are facing something that we at the National are also facing, which is that our infrastructure was built over 30 to 40 years ago, and it hasn't been invested in since. So there's been a lottery intervention in the 90s, but most of our buildings have had almost nothing other than that moment. Very different from museums and galleries that are directly funded by the DCMS. So how can we make sure that the cultural infrastructure in this country is strong so that we can be the live and digital broadcast houses that we are? Because it is something that we do as a country almost better than anything else that we do. And it's so exciting to be part of that. I suppose my last point on courage is I feel it's really possible to be courageous, and I think it's a good thing to have to find courage because there is so much hope and promise in what we do. We are an extraordinary sector. We have so much to give. If you think about every government department that there is out there, we might not be the answer to their problem in the first analysis, but we probably are the answer to the second question that they've got. We can probably help them with all of the things that they need to figure out. We can definitely help the Department of Health. We can definitely help the Department of Education, definitely levelling up, definitely Treasury, definitely Foreign Office and soft power. So there's no limit to what we can do if we tell our story properly, if we share our data consistently, if we work in a joined up way together to tell that story. And in 10 years' time, hopefully everyone will be telling that story for us.
Thank you. Well, that was incredibly inspiring to kick us off. A lot of threads and themes I can sort of feel already coming out from across what each of you were saying. For me, sort of before I open out to the audience, I think the one that really strikes me is that inherent resilience and dynamism of the sector already that you're working from a starting point, both from the people within it and also the practice and the freelancers who are sort of moving from job to job and the infrastructure that you're talking about. And I think that's quite an interesting kind of thread to think about. So we're going to take we've got about 20 minutes. We're going to take, straight up. We're going to take some questions from the audience. I'll do it in clusters, so take sort of 2 or 3 at a time. Richard, I think we've got someone straight over here. Thank you.
Ladies, very inspiring. I haven't worked in the arts in quite a few years, but just maybe start with Kate. But just in terms of engagement, everything you guys are talking about, engagement with maybe not so much spotlight, but actors equity. How much engagement do you have with them, and are they supporting you on this journey?
Great. I think we've got one over here as well. Yeah, Nashira's got the mic. Go on.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not really a question, but I'm just interested in whether the creative arts also includes public art and also work with the built environment industries. I'm from the landscape architecture industry, so we actually work with you guys quite strongly, at least providing public art in high streets and master planning projects. So I guess the solution would be to maybe collaborate more with our the green and built environment sectors, maybe collectively. We also face challenges because, as you're probably aware, 28 billion pounds of funding, which would have actually come to the green sector, is basically being pushed back. So we actually face a bit of an existential challenge as well. Yeah. So I wonder if we could actually collaborate. Now, I'm a bit surprised that arts will be seen as non-important. It's always been historically important. It's been the fabric of urban conurbations. It's been around for centuries. It's also what brings in tourism. You look at Hackney Wick, you look at Shoreditch. People don't come to these places because of the buildings. They come there for actually to be curious about the art. People go on art tours. I mean, you get so many of them in London.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. And there's another one here, and then we'll...
Hi, my name's Kostas. I feel a little bit of an imposter in a room of creatives, because I'm not a creative, but my daughter, who's 26 and is a creative, who couldn't sadly be here with me today, would want me to ask this question. She has a multi-ethnic background and a visual impairment, and she's focused on telling human stories. Today, I'm a business coach, and I help senior leaders deal with conflict, not avoid it, but resolve it. And the thing I've learned the most from my daughter's explanation of these human stories is how the arts can educate people in not only understanding themselves better, but understanding a different point of view. She just keeps reminding me, it builds empathy. It builds empathy. So in response to Amanda's very interesting summary of private sector, I used to be in financial services for my sins, but private sector collaboration, and to Kate's reference to the fact that the arts don't speak well enough about themselves, I wonder if conflict resolution and inclusive leadership as a linchpin can help large organizations recognize that leadership and development programs sometimes don't teach that as effectively as going to an incredible piece of art and having a discussion around it within teams. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Should we just take some responses to those three then? We had something about sort of identity and personal understanding, built environment, and the lady's question over here. Who would like to kick us off? I can see your script.
I'm really happy to respond to that last point. Can leadership development benefit from deeper engagement with arts? I mean, absolutely, definitely. You walk into any major or minor gallery in the country and there are rich stories of survival and erasure right there and learning to be had. So, I mean, that's an easy one. How do we make that happen? How do we do that?
Theatre is an empathy boot camp, so you're absolutely right. And actually lots of organisations have got brilliant leadership training schemes that you can do as a corporate, and that's a really good way of diversifying our income stream and making sure that we've got a kind of commercial edge to some of our corporate partnerships. So you're absolutely right, and it transforms people when they come in and do it, so we need to promote that more.
Yeah, I mean, it's something actually my organisation does, because there's something within certain areas of the arts. So my background's in theatre, and one of the things that we have used over the years is the particular skill set you learn from theatre. You know, theatre is all about interpersonal dynamics on the stage. It's all about character A interacting with character B, what they want, what tactics they play to try and get that. And there is a lot that can be learnt from that and applied to things like how we have meetings. You know, we spent a year actually with the National Theatre some years ago looking at how they could have meetings in a really effective way, and a way in which a diversity of voices could be heard. And I think the application for the wider world is significant. So I think there are certain skills that we can take from different areas of the arts and apply them to the wider world, absolutely. And I think that work is already happening.
Brilliant. And what about the others? So built environment, any reflections on that?
Can I come back on the built environment? Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think that the arts I don't know if the arts is always as brilliant as it could be at looking beyond the kind of the arts. You know, I think that wider culture areas like the built environment, I am not familiar with lots of collaborations between arts and areas like the built environment, and I would absolutely agree that there should be more, because if we're looking at the impact on people's lives that these things have, absolutely the built environment plays a huge influence on how we experience the world around us. So yeah, I would wholeheartedly advocate for more of that.
And I suppose, Amanda, that's kind of your point with the sort of cross-sectoral view that you were talking about.
Absolutely. I think built environment, I mean, of course, it's a casualty of a focus that says what is the productive GDP growth output, what's the economic output of this industry. And when you have ones that are either basically immersed throughout culture, throughout society, it's very hard for Treasury and others to quantify and measure those, so it's very hard for some people to actually articulate their worth. But so yes, we're in the same ship, and I think my point about how we articulate to government the need for industries and the benefit that they have from what we do as well, and to raise taxation specifically for culture, absolutely applies to the built environment, absolutely does.
Yes, I'm sorry, Lucy. Well, I was going to say also the other point you made was people come to areas because of the arts. Of course the arts is important, but I do think there are two things which have been in train for some time which are sort of minimising the arts. I think the reduction of arts education within the school system is significantly reducing the importance of the arts. You know, I'm having conversations with universities that teach art subjects and with conservatoires, and they are struggling to recruit students, particularly students from the UK. And there might be a number of drivers for that, but one of them logically would suggest that if you don't learn it at school, you don't plan to do it at higher education level, you don't see it as a career. So I think that is something, there's been a whittling away there. And then of course the reductions in arts subsidy, which has been in train for some time. And while we recognise what the complexities are, you know, subsidy is about saying we think this thing is so valuable that we are going to, at a state level or a local level, we are going to put money in because we believe that the benefits of it outweigh the cost of that. But of course, if you have a gradual whittling away of that subsidy, not only does that work disappear, but it does also signal something very loudly about the value you do or don't ascribe to those things.
Are you going to?
Yeah, there's definitely something really interesting to talk about around placemaking, and to pick up on Amanda's point earlier about diversifying our income streams, because government funding, for the reasons that we all understand, whoever's in government is only going one way for this sector. So what can we do collectively to be proactive in managing that? You know, working in local areas with developers who've got properties that they want to build with cultural quarters within them that helps their profitability and commerciality is a really smart way for organisations across the country to try and figure out how to get some what used to be called Section 106 funding. But you know, there are ways in which I think we can work with local government to ensure that it isn't just a handout and via a subsidy, which is, you know, is, as Lisa said, it's essential that we have some form of subsidy for our sector, absolutely. But if we could diversify and ensure that developers come in as part of that and really support that local placemaking and create cultural quarters, that would be really exciting. And it also helps with things like touring, because from the National Theatre's perspective, you know, more people see our work outside of London than they do inside of London. 1 in 4 kids in a school has an experience of the National Theatre before they leave school. These are all good things, but they can only happen if, for example, our actors want to go out on tour and have decent digs and accommodation. And 30 years ago, the digs were great, and it was Mrs. Brown with a cup of tea and a lovely bacon sandwich in the morning. It's not the same now. And actually, for example, getting a developer to, as part of a development, build in a set of accommodation so that touring companies could take those and use them as their acting accommodation. I realise that's fraught with problems, but we should start from a place of inspiration and adaptability, as opposed to immediately zoning in on the thing that's not going to work.
And it's a conversation that we need to have with government, because I can think of another really compelling example of Piccadilly Circus post-pandemic, where those big screens, the hub of the tourism London's tourism was absolutely empty, and there were no adverts coming any time now because nobody had been in production, so there wasn't anything. And Piccadilly Circus, the owners, actually gave over some time to visual artists and put some phenomenal stuff on those screens, and it drew people back to the area. And now they have a hybrid model where they put advertisements and they have takeovers by artists. There's a reason why Netflix gave money to the cultural sector during the pandemic. There's a reason why Nike and others work with young people to do takeover nights, DJ nights. There's a reason, because their brands are absolutely linked, inextricably linked with what we do, and yet there isn't any explicit financial ask for them to support a sector that is leaning on public subsidy, which is shrinking. So we've got loads of examples, but we actually, you know, I agree, we need to get better with teasing out these examples, putting the conversation to government, going, help us work through this to make it really embedded in the productivity and the outputs of all of those organisations, all of those industries that lean on us already.
And I think they're pushing at an open door.
Yeah,
I don't think there's anybody who works for DCMS that doesn't want those
Absolutely.
things. For example, I think everybody is really trying to figure out the puzzle that gets us all to financial sustainability. So I think we need to be adaptive and as a sector come up with solutions.
And brave. And Kate, there was a question directly for you, I think. If you...
About the unions. Yeah, I think generally speaking, we have a really good relationship in our country with the unions that sort of help represent the staff who populate the sector. You know, I'm always struck by the fact that 2/3 of our workforce at the National Theatre, for example, are freelancers, and most of them are unionised, and our relationship with unions is really important. If I look at America and the way in which the build back of theatre there has been managed post-COVID, I think that there are some really interesting advantages that we have in this country, both in relation to the relationship that we have with our unions here, which I think is a really positive one, but also in relation to the tax reliefs we've been given by our government, actually. So it's quite useful looking at other jurisdictions to see how they have been able to rebuild and how quickly, and actually to think, you know, I was tasked with being hopeful, so I think the good news story is that we have actually got a lot that has been working for us over the last few years in terms of that build back. And audiences, for some sectors, and I'm absolutely not saying this is the case across the country in every art form, but for some organisations, audiences are actually stronger than they were pre-COVID. So the good news for me in that is people want what we're doing. They believe in it, they're excited that it's back. What we need to try and figure out a way of doing is matching that appetite with the increase of costs that has come in to do exactly the same thing as we did before, but it's just more expensive than it was. And that's the difficulty. I think audiences are there and they want what we're offering, and I think unions and, you know, tax breaks and all those things are sort of enablers of that activity.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, we've just got just under 5 minutes left, so I'm going to do another quick round. Seen hands jump up over here, yes, in the front row.
Yes, hello. Just taking up some of the points that Kate in particular made about arts telling its own story, the arts world, and the importance of, people made points about the importance of arts education, advocacy for the arts, and lobbying government. Now, what I don't know if any of you remember the Arts Council of Great Britain, which was around before Maggie Thatcher, and was actually doing all those things. And I believe that, that when it was set up after the war by Keynes, the Arts Council, that's what its function was supposed to be, standing up for the arts community, for, you know, when in discussions with government. And it was because it actually became too politically powerful in the 1980s that Thatcher disbanded it. And I think the Arts Council is now a shadow of its former self. So I think something that might be considered is whether there is a case for reconstituting an Arts Council of Great Britain.
Great. And I'm very sorry, I'm going to ask for just the lady behind you in red to just very briefly ask the question. Sorry.
Just a brief question. How do you see the arts responding to the challenges from AI that it's currently facing?
Brilliant. And I'm very sorry for others. We are really short on time, so I think we'll just leave it there, but I'm sure you can ask the questions online afterwards. Who wants to kick off on advocacy and AI? See if you can weave them.
How do we see the arts responding? We see it like this. That's what we see. I'm really struck that Tyler Perry closed his production. Tyler Perry is a really prolific, creative screen maker in the US, and he shut down his production of the development of his studios, having just seen what Sora, the latest learning model, does with moving image, and that is it's not really on the horizon, it's here. How do we respond to it? I mean, as I said, there is great hope of some kind of dialogue that says remuneration to artists because their work is the ground zero of EI. But let's be real, the online harms bill is still going through government, and that's kind of like talking about the advent of the telephone as opposed to the internet now. So by the time anything comes through, it's too late, done deal. Which is why I look at how can we look at those firms that benefit from that to be paying from source a pot of money that goes to the cultural sector. So how do we respond to AI? We have to be real that some of those jobs that exist are going. The jobs typically around writing, they have been automated, they will be automated further. Creative writers who used to do copywriting or what have you as a side hustle won't be doing that. So of course lots of jobs will be going. I do think there is huge value and beauty in the live and the real. That's not going anywhere now or forever. But actually, if organizations, if companies are benefiting from the work and the wealth of creative endeavor, they absolutely should be rewarding the sector itself for that original contact that absolutely built their business.
Brilliant, thank you. And 30 seconds on advocacy. Who wants to take it, Lucy or Kate?
I mean, the central sort of point I think you were raising was, do we need and want a strong, vibrant Arts Council husting for the sector? And I think we do, absolutely. That is absolutely the ideal. An arm's length body that is there for us, that is independent and able to hust for us as a sector is a really powerful thing. So I would just, applaud the spirit of the question, but I do think it's important that there is an Arts Council for this country. We just have to figure out the right way to collectively support the new world in which we live and figure out what they need from us as a sector to enable them to be a partner for us in that advocacy work.
Brilliant. Thank you. And I'm very sorry that's all we've got time for. We could continue all afternoon, I think. But you can continue the conversation online with the hashtag Fellows Festival 2024. And yeah, if you could all please join me in thanking our brilliant speakers.
Right, are the mics on? Can you hear me? Is that mic working? Yeah? Oh, that's better, right? Now can be heard. Listen, welcome back, everyone. And we're into the final session, and we're ending on the highest of notes, we really are, with our keynote address from someone who is, without question, one of the most influential creative leaders in the country. Kwame started out his career path as an actor, but remember, including in Casualty, and then went on to even bigger and even better things as an acclaimed playwright and as director. He ran the Baltimore Center Stage Theatre from 2011 to 2017, before returning to the UK, of course, to take the role of artistic director at the Young Vic, the very first Afro-Caribbean person to lead a major British theatre. Well, listen, during that time, Kwame has transformed the Young Vic, stunning new work and bold reimaginings of the classics. Now, Kwame recently announced that this would be his last, regrettably, season at the Young Vic, but he'll leave behind a truly exceptional Kwame artistic legacy, and indeed an important cultural legacy as well, every bit as important. Across the 40 productions staged during his tenure, more than half of the play's writers and directors have been women. Black and global majority artists have directed over half and written almost half of the Young Vic's main house shows. And offstage, the Young Vic has been equally transformed, from 11% to 44% black and global majority staff across the organisation, and 40% in senior management. A remarkable achievement indeed, Kwame. As someone who is without question a restless creative spirit, a risk taker, a storyteller, a mold breaker, a change maker, as we're about to see, someone exceptionally smartly dressed. We really couldn't have anyone more apt to finish our festival today and deliver our finale on courage with the keynote of the day. So please join me in welcoming to the stage the brilliant Kwame Kwei-Armah.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. It takes courage to come on this stage directly after those brilliant women. So I want to thank them also for talking about the arts in a most profound and brilliant way. And I want to thank you for that beautiful introduction. My children are listening, or at least I recorded it so that they can. Get some brownie points a bit later on. And thank you all for being here. I actually like to start things like this. You know, I'm an African kind of guy. I believe in call and response. And so I kind of want to just kind of get a little vibes and know who's in the room. So I wonder if you could do me a favor. On the count of 3, just shout your name out. All at the same time. 1, 2, 3. Kwame. All right, I heard a Susan, Brian, Ade. All right, good. And then I'd like you to do one other thing, actually, for me. Now, I'm going to give you about 10 seconds to think about this. I want you to think about a poem, a line from a poem, a line from the lyrics of a song, or even from a play, but something that really made the difference in your life. That moment when hearing those words saved you, helped you, allowed you to help someone else, defined you. I want you to take 10 seconds to think about that line, that couplet, that lyric. I'm keeping explaining to extend your 10 seconds. And when you've got that, just raise your hand gently so that I know that you're good. I see some hands. That's great. That's great. That's great. That's great. That's great. Fantastic. All right, on the count of 3, I want you to scream it into the air. We good? 1, 2, 3. Fight the power. You've got to fight the power that be. Great. Do we have a microphone? Yeah, great. Can I have one, please? Thank you. Okay, this is the point where all the camera people say, what's wrong with this guy? All right, did you put your hand up, sir? Yeah, good. Tell me what it was.
A journey of 1,000 miles begins with one single step.
Beautiful. Who said that?
I believe it's Confucius.
Very good. We'll have some of that. Who else put there? Let me go, yeah, to you, Matt. Red, thank you.
I don't know who wrote it, but it was on my grandmother's table as a poem. And it ends with, ere I forget all the joy that is mine today.
Never forget all the joy that is mine today. I'm going to do 2 more. I'm going to go down a few rows. And I'm just going to go, the people who don't want, they're looking away. They're like going, don't come near me. I'm not interested in this thought experiment. I'm going to go to you. Did you put your hand up?
I didn't.
You didn't? Then I think you're still going to have to now, right?
Okay, Okay, it's not really a poem, but the thing I can think of is a quote from Khalil Gibran, which is, "Your pain is the breaking of the your pain is the breaking of the shell that encapsulates your understanding."
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Thank you. And I'm going to go over there for the last one. So again, look away if you don't want me to come by you. And then, no, leave that there. That's thank you. And I deliberately will. I can see you looking down, ma'am. So I'm going to keep, I'm just because I'm a nice guy, I'm going to keep going forward. But I think whoever sat next to you, I'm going to ask. So that later I've just caused some confusion. There we go.
Life can be a daring adventure, or it can be nothing at all.
Ooh, who's that?
Helen Keller.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, everyone, for being so bold as to share that. Oh, let me give this mic back. I've got one, haven't I? Okay, just so greedy. Okay, thank you. That's important for me. Mine is, I was about 24, and the rap band Public Enemy kind of burst into the scene about 1988, and it was really dangerous and subversive to even listen to them. At least that's what I thought. And then by about 1991, they let out this song called Fight the Power. You've got to fight the power that be. And I can remember where I was when I heard that. I can remember what effect it had on me. And many, many years later, sometimes I've had to realize that I am the power and that people will be fighting me. And that really helped me when I started to think about why I do what I do and where I am right now. And I am in the legacy business. It's no longer about me. Thank you for reading my beautiful CV. But in a kind of way, you can add things to it, but I've kind of done what I've done, right? Now you get to a certain age and you start thinking about what can I do for those who come behind me? What pride do I have when I see a brilliant member of staff that I've promoted and they fly, and then you promote again and they fly, and then they leave you and you get really upset that they've left you. But you see them in their new job flying. There's something beautiful about legacy. And in a way that underpins everything that I'm going to say today. And I also want to thank Andy and the RSA, because I was really excited to see this word courage be the catalyst for today's meeting, for today's festival. It's so positive. It demands action. It demands thought. It demands that you think about yourself in relation to it. So I just want to thank you again for bringing that into my life today. I'm overjoyed to kind of just be here, because this place is dedicated to new ideas, big ideas, desperately needed ideas. It'd be fair to say that we here in the UK are an understated nation. Some might say a historical gunboat diplomacy nation. So today's theme of courage is kind of wonderful because, well, to operate and lead in the arts today, it takes courage. And I take my hat off to everyone that does it. Actually, you do it so well. Possibly too well for your own good, but I'm going to come back to that. The headlines in this week's Economist reads, Britain, where the arts at their best still dazzle the world, but must decide how much it wants to invest to remain a magnet for artistic innovation and performance. How many people in this room would define themselves as an arts leader or an arts practitioner? Okay, great. Good. I would say a nice minority. How many here frequent the arts? Amen. So the context of that headline, of course, was that we know, there have been central government cuts since austerity was introduced. The 1997 to 2010 Labour government spent generously on the arts, but in 2010, ACE's budget was slashed by 30%, which meant for my sector, theatre, we were at standing funding for 13 years. Yes, 13 years, 12 of them before the cost of living crisis. I want to say, for example, I have a budget at the moment that I'm working on for a production, and we did this budget in October. We revisited it last week. And I'm just talking basic materials, no additions. and it's gone up by over 30%. Today, to budget in our sector takes courage. Lord Bragg recently warned of cultural vandalism, referencing the moving of money out of the rich southern subsidized sector and out into the rest of the country. But what I fear most is the funding situation we are in right now, right across the country. And it is diminishing the very thing that we are speaking of today, courage. Actually, I want to push a little further than that. I would argue that the funding situation has created an atmosphere of fear, and fear erodes confidence. Fear contracts the imagination. Fear attacks ambition. And what diminished ambition denies most importantly or most perniciously is opportunity. The emerging and mid-career artists in this country in theatre are asking existential questions of themselves and of us. They're saying, how can I exist in a sector that for the foreseeable future will not be in a position to employ me, to invest in me? And their ultimate fear is that this stagnation is personal to them. It feels like if it's only there to support the status quo, those who by lottery of birth are able to make it through. And now that they have, up comes the drawbridge. This, I believe, underpins some of the toxic exchanges we've witnessed on social media in the arts over the last 5 years at least. What does that do for those of us who believe in legacy? What does it do for those of us who feel that the only reason we are here is to make sure that tomorrow is defined well? What this fear, or as my executive director Lucy Davis calls the narrowing, ultimately does, is to ask us leaders themselves to be complicit in the undermining of their own sector. To perpetuate and bake in unsustainable profit or loss models that run contrary to the founding principles of the not-for-profit subsidized sector. I quote a fearless leader of the early American not-for-profit theatre movement, Zelda Fitch-Handler. She said, "We make a choice to produce our plays not to recoup an investment, but to recoup some corner of the universe for our understanding and enlargement. We must create something different, something of value, something our government and our patrons can embrace with love and humor." Jenny Lee, arts minister in Harold Wilson's government, stated in a 1964 white paper, A Policy for the Arts, that the arts had to be valued as highly as any other industry, that it was crucial that the population had equality of access to arts wherever they lived, that new ventures needed to be supported as much as established institutions, and that participation of all was essential. She wasn't wrong, was she? What's really interesting is that in real terms, the pound has lost 96% of its value since 1964. Our position in the league table of industrial nations has tumbled. Our superpower in Britain is not our traditional industrial might, our ownership of big tech or platform capitalism. Our superpower is our creativity. Anyone in the room disagree with me? Our artistic might opens doors for our business people across the world and attracts millions to our shores, not just in tourist pounds, but in investment pounds. If, as the latest McKinsey report has laid out, that for every pound invested in the arts, almost 150 goes back into the local economy, and that the creative sector is the fastest growing sector in the country. If we believe this to be true, and most people like to believe what McKinsey say, our investment in the arts is an investment in our industrial capacity, something that should be deeply embedded in our fifth industrial revolution strategy. Therefore, we must have the courage to invest sustainably in our arts and our artists. Now again, as Andy said, I've just resigned from the best job I've ever had in my life. And I did that the day that I woke and I realized that the act of creating a long-term, not even actually, a short-term, sustainable business model in this economic environment, which is a continual act of creating all wine and water, that I was being complicit in the undermining of the very privilege I walk the world with, the privilege of British creativity. For background, I inherited a wonderful, brilliant theatre. And like many cultural institutions, it had a structural deficit due mainly to standstill funding. To balance the books, we moved from 3 stages to 1. No space to counter-program. Innovation, access, and high box office income, all from 1 stage. Yet again, as Andy said, in 6 years, we were able to move our staff from box office to senior management, from 11% black and global majority to 44%, making our theatre reflect its environment, London. We transferred plays to the West End and Broadway, created an original online streaming platform that had our work seen in 86 countries. Our community department innovated its work in local schools and took its mission to the US and Australia. We produced plays written by AI and continued during the pandemic and beyond, servicing 2,500 emerging and mid-career artists with workshops every week. Wine and water, my friends. But even that actually is looking in the rearview mirror, and that's quite boring to me. I hadn't even begun my 3rd act at the Young Vic, and that's of kind of 3 acts, not 5. With the support of my brilliant board, we had planned to start a capital campaign to convert one of our spaces into a live music, sports, and arts venue, build an AI XR studio for the current generation of multidisciplinary artists and the virtual exploitation of our productions, build a multi-nation production that shared cast and resources. I am neither tired nor was I fired. We are projected to make a surplus this year and next. I have the energy and the ideas to move into another leadership position if I so wish, but I am a working class black man. It was not perceivable but 6 years ago when I took over at the Young Vic that a black male, one of the most disinvested demographics in theatre, would lead a major London venue. I said at the top, I believe in legacy, so I cannot and I will not draw the bridge up after me. Not in a sector designed to nurture, to include, to innovate. Now, this is not a Young Vic problem, but a sector problem. Relying on the generosity of US-styled philanthropy, creating even more complex and unsustainable income streams, it unfairly taxes leadership and it creates fear. The fear that I've been referencing. It diminishes courage. Our sector cannot afford to lose people at my end. We'll simply move into the commercial sector of theatre, television, and film, both here and internationally. But it's so short-sighted of our nation to pull the rug from beneath the next generation, chomping at the bit to take us to the next level of innovation and success. So whichever government is in power at the end of the year, I simply ask you to have the courage to have a big idea. A straightforward, unremarkable, but fair idea. One that funds the arts sustainably. Stop worrying about us being compared to the collection of refuge or under-resourced social service department and understand that we are an integral part of the social and business services of this country. Our economic contribution alone far exceeds our current level of investment. I say again, we must invest sustainably in our nation's creative power. This is not arts for art's sake, but part of a plan to replenish our national coffers, to sustain our global position as a creative, artistic superpower. We must have the courage to do this. And we, the practitioners of the arts, must have the courage to demand this, not just of our governments, but of we, the citizens that elect them. Sometimes we might have to do that with our feet. I hope that no other leader has to leave their beloved post, because the future does not look like it's one where we can invest in legacy. Thank you so much.
I did tell you it was going to be brilliant, didn't I? Kwame, that was amazing. We've got 20 minutes. I'm going to save my question till the end and go to the audience straight away, because I know there's going to be so many thoughts, questions, reflections from the audience. We'll start here.
Thank you. That was a life-changing speech. And I wondered what makes fear the kernel of courage?
That's a nice question. Well, let me frame it this way, that I'm afraid of fear. I really am, which means that every time I see it, I have to run directly at it. And I have to run directly at it because if I allow it to defeat me, I will live under a rock. And I was trying to work it out the other day, why it happened, and forgive a little bit more of biography, but I grew up in the 1980s where white youth culture defined itself through the lens of skinhead right-wing politics. And it meant that I lived in an area called Southall, and I'm going to call that the donut, because everywhere around Southall was just surrounded by extreme right-wingers, and I had to travel 7 miles to school every day. And it meant that I left the safety of my bubble, and then I had to go through racist area upon racist area upon racist area. And every day was a dance with death. Every day I looked at another black person who got onto my bus, and I went, and they went, yeah, meaning, I got you, I've got my eyes for you. And I think what that did for me was make sure that if I loved school, by the way, and I loved going to school. So it meant I either had to bend to fear or fight it in order to be fed. I don't necessarily call that courage. I call it survival. And so is fear the kernel of courage? I don't know. But what fear is something that we must rebuke. What fear is something we must negotiate with. And if from that comes courage, then so be it.
Lovely. Thank you.
Kwame, thank you. That was fantastic. We're currently in our business looking at the whole issue of succession planning, and I'm working with my successor. What quality does your successor need that you don't possess?
Again, a really brilliant question. And actually, I've danced with this a little bit. The moment that you kind of go, okay, I'm going to transition out. You then think, I really hope the next person's shit so that I look really good. And then you get a grip of yourself. That lasts about 4 seconds. And then you start thinking about legacy. And then you think, oh, I want them to have all of the things that I don't have. I love being a leader. I don't love managing. I do it. I want someone who comes in next, I'd hope that they love managing, because that's really good for staff. I hope that whoever comes in next doesn't feel like I feel, which is even though I've run institutions on 3 continents for the last 15 years, I still fundamentally feel like a freelancer. And I hope that whoever comes in next doesn't have that in the way that I do as something that weighs on their shoulder, that feels guilty about feeling that. But I also feel that whoever comes in next, that I don't even want them to know that I existed in some way. I just want them to be them. The only thing I ask of them is before you throw me under the bus, and you should, be it publicly or privately, just call me to say, Kwame, I'm about to throw you under the bus to the camera. Because, you know, that thing that you did there was really crap, and I'm going to do it differently. And I'll be like, cool. And I've done that at Baltimore Center Stage. It's exactly what I said to my predecessor. I said to her, to my successor rather, I said to her, again, I know you're gonna have to throw me under the bus, just call me. And she did. And there were times when she sat in the room, she said, what Kwame did, I disagree with, and it was wrong. And I'm gonna do it my way. And then a board member might call me up and go, did you know that she really dissed you? And I was a bit like, cool. So whoever comes in should not be a version of me, but a full version of themselves.
Beautiful. Where should we go next in the room? Over here.
Thank you. That was amazing. My youngest son is in his penultimate year at drama school. He is so excited about the future and the potential, and particularly how you bring something like motion capture into a theatre setting. So he's just sparking with ideas. And the careers advice he's being given is just calm down. And I'm kind of curious about that. And I wonder, what advice would you give to someone in his position to, you talked about legacy, to have a sustainable future, because this is where his heart is.
There are three responses that I have to that. First of all, I have 4 children and 2, well actually 3 are in the arts. So I'm going to be working forever. So in terms of sustainability, have a really good pension. Have a really good... you know, whoever told him to calm down, I'd love to have their email address so that I could send them a really, you know, tough email, because it is that ingenuity that I'm talking about. This generation, unlike my generation, who grew up thinking that you only had to do one thing for the rest of your life. I used to hide the other things I did in a bushel so that people wouldn't know. They have grown up to call themselves anti-disciplinary, not even disciplinary. They'll wake up today and say, guess what, I'm gonna do a podcast, and wake up tomorrow and go, I'm gonna make a movie, and wake up the next day and I'm gonna do stop motion. And actually that's all part of their portfolio, because they have to do it because the world has changed. So I would say to your son, well done. Know that that will give you the edge. Thinking about technology and access is not even today, it's yesterday. So whoever thinks that they should not be are simply in another world. We did a play 3 years ago, written by AI. And the reason we did a play written by AI is because I got afraid of it. And as usual, if I'm afraid of it, I've got to run at it. And what we did is we put we prompted the AI to write this play, but I put 3 brilliant playwrights in the room and 5 actors and a director. And the whole idea of that, and actually day 1, the piece in AI was really bad. And by the end of the run, it was pretty good. And, but actually I went, we as human beings are gonna have to find a way to dance with it, to tame it, to enhance it. So I say again that the way that your son is thinking is the tool that will make him successful, or will sustain him when times are bad and funds are low.
Now we have Tim at the front here.
Thanks, Kwame, that was incredible. You talked about being a black man. You also talked about being a working class man. And I wondered, I was going to talk about the fear of poverty, of taking a risk of going to something like acting, but it probably wasn't a fear. Poverty probably wasn't a fear. It was probably a reality, right? You know, struggling financially. But so I wondered, you know, how we encourage more working class people into acting, but also how we encourage more working class people to embrace arts like opera or ballet or classical music, where they're given the message, this is not really for people like us.
Yeah, and I think it's a Jedi mind trick, right? Because no one says, guess what, you're working class, I'm not gonna take your taxes. Right? Everything is ours. And I often say to my children, I keep calling them children, they're grown now, but you know, that walk into every room and assume equality. But the moment someone challenges your equality, revert to superiority. Everything is yours. I remember the first time I was taken to the opera. I was quaking. I was so afraid. And I was so afraid because everybody else in that opera house kind of knew Don Giovanni and I didn't. And I felt intellectually inferior. And then, by the 5th time I saw Don Giovanni, I realized that it was for me. It was a story of fathers and sons. It was a story that was just told with a technique that was different to listening to Stevie Wonder, but with the same passion. And so it's important for us and people go, yeah, Kwame, sure, you're working class. I like to describe myself as of working class heritage, if we need to pass that. But it's so important that we walk into every space and own it. Because if we don't, that invisible lion, that invisible policeman or woman that stops you from mentoring is only projected by you. Of course the system says, I don't want you in here. But we have to usurp that. That's what I would say.
Okay, at the front.
Hi, a little controversial question, which is, I understand why you've resigned, the reasons you've given today, but if I put it to you, well, maybe you should stay in the system because you can't change the system unless you're in it, so that you can fight for all those things that you believe in. What would your answer be to that?
I would say that's not controversial, but thank you for asking that. I believe that, and of course I negotiated with that with myself before I came to that decision. And I think what fear does, it creates fight or flight. And I think because of the position that I'm in, I can do both. I can continue, even if I'm in the commercial sector, to fight for the rights of the difference between the subsidized sector and the commercial sector. Mm-hmm. That I can continue to advocate from a position of whatever power I may have. I'm not running away. I'm simply saying at this moment and at this time, it is untenable. And what I'm not going to do is be complicit. It's like sometimes, I'm an African Caribbean. And there are moments when, through our enslavement, we could look 200 years that way and 250 years that way and only see enslavement. And sometimes you might find resistance is futile. Why? And other times there were people who got up and said, you know what? I'm not going to take this anymore. And that's the decision that I have come to. The decision is that I have a profile enough to say, if we do not invest sustainably in our subsidized arts sector, you will lose people like me, but most importantly, you will annihilate the generation to come. Are you happy with that?
Question, one down the front here and perhaps one at the end as well. Can I actually see?
Thank you for that. When are you going to become Secretary of State for Culture? And what is the first thing you're going to do when you are?
I think that's a really hard question, because whatever I say, politicians go, no, I don't want that at all. And actually I don't, and I'll tell you why. Because I use my art to be my politics. And I believe in burying my politic, like spinach, right at the bottom, and letting people discover it. And then when they discover it, then they dance with it, if you've got the art right. And I think the art of being a politician is telling you what you want to hear. That runs contrary to a playwright who wants to tell you the thing that you didn't.
Wonderful.
I hope that answered that. You're not sure? Come. Good.
question there, a couple of questions, I think, maybe in the corner.
Thank you. Ed Matthews-Gentle. I'm Strategic Lead for Culture and Creative Industries in Lancashire. You've spoken about your kind of bravery, I guess, and your kind of fight.
Can you say that one more time? You've spoken about?
About your response to fear.
Okay, good.
Yeah, but a slight nuanced question on that. Because a career in the arts and creative industries, it takes a lot of bravery. It can be a very precarious endeavour as well. And one of the things at some stage that happens is that you're in a situation where you can say no for the first time. And I think that's a real pivotal time for a creative, to kind of say no, to turn down that brief, to sort of, say no, I'm not going to do this, this isn't the right thing. And that's quite a key moment. And I was curious to understand, what is it within you that actually kind of made you sort of, can get up one day and decide, no, no more, not this. And were the words, was there someone who sort of, or moments that you remember when you had to make that sort of choice yourself? And going back to today's theme about courage, where did you find that courage?
Well, thank you for that. And I think I'll reference that I don't know that I define it as courage. I define it as an action. And if I may just really quickly, I've done this before. I was negotiating a new contract. It was really lovely when I was in Casualty. And that night, and we would shoot Casualty 200 miles away in Bristol. Love Bristol, if anybody's on that. And that night, I called my son. And my son, we've always had a really wonderful relationship. And he was being really rude. He was about 12 and really dysfunctional. And then he said, "Dad, what do you know? You don't know me." And I went, oh, shit. And the next morning, even though I was really looking forward to the money I was going to make with my new contract, I called the executive producers and I said, I got to go. I got to be at home for my son. When I was in Baltimore, I came to London and RADA was producing my very first play. It was called A Bitter Herb. And I'd written it maybe 15 years before, maybe 12 years before. And I'm the kind of mind that once I've written something, I've forgotten it. I don't know anything. And they invited me, so I came. And I was really frightened. And I went, oh, my God, I'm going to go in and I'm going to see this junior playwright. And I'm going to see all his mistakes. And I thought I was really good at the time. And, oh, my God, it's going to read. And I went to see the play. And I realized that I was braver then as a new playwright than I was as an AD. And that if I didn't move away from the comfort of being an AD, of trying to please people, I would never be that artist again. And so I walked back into Baltimore the next day after we had done a capital campaign and we had raised the theatre, and the theatre was in my image. And I said to the chair, I've got to go. So my restless spirit tells me, and then my mind tries to engage in the complexities of what it means to move at that moment. It would be vain of me to call it courage. What it is trying to listen to the spirit and trying to be true to the gift that I've been given, which is to be an artist. And to be an artist is to excavate the cracks that are placed before us and reflect them back. You've got to have the tools to do that. And where there are not the tools, I get busy.
Now, running short, I reckon with time for one or two more questions. So we'll take one down here. Thank you.
Thank you. It's more, I do beg your pardon. Wow. It's a reflection, not a question. I just wanted to say that I kind of spent most of the day debating with myself what the cause of courage was and what the requirement of courage was, and to some extent, therefore, what the opposite of courage was. And I think what you've shown this afternoon is that the sister of courage is integrity, and you have so much of that, and I hear so much of that in what you're saying, and I just want to thank you for that.
God bless you. Bless you.
Would anyone like the last question to Kwame? before I steal it?
It's not a question, really. I'm 60 on Tuesday. And I joked on Facebook before I came today that I was going to be here with people, the worthy and the good, and that's what I'd like to be when I grow up, because I haven't quite grown up. But I notice I started out in acting and then abandoned it because I didn't have courage. Because I was 7.5 stone and I was too fat, and I had an RP accent and it wasn't interesting then. In the 80s, and I went into mental health, and that was a time when asylums were still full of legacy patients who were there because they were gay, because they'd had babies out of wedlock, because we had this terrible unofficial term called West Indian psychosis then.
Yes, I know it well.
We have come so far, and maybe that's the legacy of my generation. But I had a little break and I went and did history for a while, and I just wish I could be around in 50 years' time to see what happens next. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kwame, we're approaching the end, and I'm going to steal the last question from myself, as I mentioned. Just sensing the mood in the room, I think we are all buyers, investors in Kwame's mesmerizing vision of how things could be. So I suppose my question to you, Kwame, is how can we as the RSA, we as fellows and friends, how can we help you make good on your vision?
Well, thank you. The first thing I would say is that I think it is our vision, because I don't think there's anyone in the room, from reading the room, that believes that our superpower is not our creativity. And I think we have to be bold with that. I think we have to stop allowing ourselves to be pushed into corners and come out loud and proud, not make apologies and go, I know there's not enough money in the coffers. There is enough money for the bankers. When we want money, there's money. There's enough money for all stuff. And then we start going, but we can't do this. We can have a big idea. And that's what everybody in this room can do. They can help form a big idea. They can help put pressure on our politicians to have a big idea to fund our arts sustainably. And I think we can all do that. Let's let our local politicians know that the arts matter, that it's not something that should be snuck into the manifesto, but something that they could even possibly lead with. Everybody wants to be cool. Nothing's cooler than the arts.
Come here, man.
Thank you so much.
I wish I wasn't following that, to be honest. But listen, it's time to wrap things up. I just want to wrap up with a few thank yous. To the huge number of people that have made today possible, have made today such a success. I don't know about you, but I've had a wonderful time today, and I hope you have as well. And that's thanks to, I say, a great many people. They absolutely include our incredible speakers today, from the very start to the very end, and Kwame's words, gracious. But also to our session hosts, to the workshop leads, to the artists and performers. And if you heard the band, the children's band down at lunch in the vaults, they were absolutely incredible. They were mesmerizing too in their own way. It's been really wonderful, and I've certainly got a huge amount from it. I can't believe how many quotable lines I've heard today. Not least from, I've got 50 from Kwame. To all of them, a huge thank you for giving up your Saturday to come along and to entertain and to educate and to energize and inspire all of us. To the whole of the staff of the RSA and Company of Cooks, the team here, both before and on the day today. I mentioned at the very start how proud I was of them, and if it's possible, I'm even prouder, having gone through the day we've had today, for all the efforts they've put in. I hope in helping you have the best day possible, and also in supporting our work as we move ahead. It's absolutely invidious to pick on any one individual within that staff, but I'm going to do exactly that, actually, because Emma Land is in the back there, I think, and Emma's going to come up here. Emma, come on up. Emma, how's it been for you?
I've never deserved a stiff drink so much in my entire life. That's what I'm saying. With a straw.
With a straw.
Yeah, but it's been... Oh, thank you. It's been... I remember I came to the Fellows Festival last year, and I wasn't actually a staff member at that time. I was joining the next day, but I thought, I'll come along, see what this is all about, because apparently I'm supposed to be managing the next one. And I looked around and I was inspired, and then I was, you know, my project management background kicked in, and I was like, well, I'll do this differently, and I'll do this differently. And yeah, I put that into action this year. We had a grand, courageous idea. I woke up and said to Andy, I want to take this on the road and not just make it London-based. So we had it across the UK and other countries as well, some of which we were lucky enough to carry on and do, some of which were a little bit kiboshed. But I'm so proud of all of the team. I'm not going to name just one person, because there are so many that have helped to support me, but also just make this day a fantastic success. It's a village, it really, really is. And what's really been so humbling is actually talking to a lot of the fellows and the guests here today, just saying how much they've enjoyed it, connected, and you know, and I hope that still continues. Downstairs in the vaults, we are having a welcome. You've got a complimentary drink when you arrive. That's if I haven't drunk them all for you. And you know, feel free to come down and connect with some of the staff members there as well, but each other. So I really hope that you have had a fantastic day. You'll all be sent a post-event survey, and it was welcome. Feedback is a gift. So, you know, if we are to continue these events, we want your feedback. We want to know how we can improve, because nothing is impossible if it can be attempted. That's my quote, Kwame. And Emma Land said that one, so I patent that one. And I feel that, you know, we could always aim for better every time. So thank you.
Listen, we'll be granting Emma that stiff drink in about 30 seconds' time. But my last thank you, of course, is to all of you for coming along. All of you online, all of you in the room, all of you in the house. You are our fellows, but you're also our friends. You are what makes the magic in the RSA, and we're hugely grateful for your support, not just today, but throughout the future course of the RSA and beyond. Something special is stirring here, and the world needs something special to stir right now to tackle its many challenges. But I just feel today, with your support and your help and your friendship and your kindness, we can do just that. Thank you, and please join us in the vaults for a drink to celebrate today and to celebrate the future.